Today's story is about a guy named Noah. He graduated college with honors, double major, dean's list, paid his own way the whole time. On the day he walked across that stage, his parents weren't there. They were in the backyard throwing a party for his sister, because she got elected vice president of her sorority. He came home still in his cap and gown, found a note on the counter, and ate cold chicken alone at the kitchen table while he could hear them laughing outside. What he did the next morning, and what he built in the year that followed, is exactly why I love this channel. On graduation day, my parents threw my sister a party. I came home to an empty house and a note. Leftovers in the fridge. I ate alone in silence. The next morning, I was gone. A year later, Dad left a voicemail. I still haven't played it. My name's Noah. I'm 27. I run a wealth management firm. I have a woman in my corner who's genuinely the best person I've ever met, and I built every single piece of my life from scratch while my family wasn't watching. Which honestly, tracks. They weren't watching for most of it anyway. I grew up in a mid-sized town in North Carolina, the kind of place where everyone eats at the same 3 restaurants and acts like the barbecue spot on Elm Street is some kind of hidden gem, even though the parking lot's always packed. My family looked normal from the outside. Dad worked in commercial insurance. Mom was a part-time office manager at a dental practice. Then there was me and my younger sister, Elise. Elise is 2 years younger, and if you asked my parents, she basically invented sunlight. Look, I'm not one of those people who blames everything on sibling rivalry. I get it. Family dynamics shake out in weird ways, and parents aren't robots. But there's a difference between a slight lean and a full-on architectural collapse in one direction. In my house, Elise was the sun, and I was whatever rock floats in the dark on the opposite side of the solar system. I don't think it was intentional, at least not at first. Elise was the loud one, the performer, the kid who'd sing at family gatherings and make strangers misty. She did theater in middle school, cheerleading in high school, student council, homecoming court, the whole highlight reel. My parents were front row for all of it. Mom once drove 45 minutes in a thunderstorm to watch Elise's junior year talent show, where she sang a Carrie Underwood song. I had a cross-country meet that same weekend, 15 minutes from our house. Neither of them showed up. Dad said he forgot. Mom said she thought it was the following week. It was on the fridge calendar in red ink. I wrote it there myself. I was the quiet one. Good grades, not great. Ran track, played a little guitar, kept to myself. I wasn't causing problems for anyone, but I also wasn't performing. And in my family, if you weren't performing, you were furniture. I learned pretty early that asking for attention was like yelling into a canyon. You'd hear your own voice bounce back, and that was about it. There were 100 small moments over the years that chipped away at me. Elise got a car for her 16th birthday. Used Honda Accord, nothing crazy, but still a car. I got my license 6 months before her, and was told to take the bus until I could save up for my own. When Elise got into state, Mom threw her a surprise party. I found out I got into UNC Charlotte from a letter I opened alone at the kitchen counter while everyone was out buying Elise's celebration cake. I remember standing there holding the envelope, reading the word congratulations, and the house being completely empty. I put the letter on the fridge myself. It sat there for 2 days before Mom noticed and said, "Oh, that's nice, honey." 4 words. That's nice, honey. If I had to tattoo my entire childhood onto my forearm in one sentence, that'd be it. But I kept going, told myself it didn't matter, that I'd build something they couldn't ignore. I put my head down through college, double majored in finance and economics, held down a part-time job at a bookstore near campus, and graduated with honors. Dean's list. I was proud of myself. Really was. And maybe, just maybe, I thought this would be the thing that finally made them see me. Graduation day was in May. Beautiful weather. The kind of spring day that feels like the universe giving you a thumbs up. I woke up feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hopeful. I ironed my white shirt, put on my tie, looked in the mirror and thought, today they'll be proud. Today is my day. The ceremony was at 2 in the afternoon. I'd told my parents weeks in advance. Texted them the details. Literally printed out a schedule and left it on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker where Dad stands every morning like a confused zombie waiting for caffeine to revive him. They said they'd be there. I walked across that stage, shook the dean's hand, and looked out into the crowd. Scanned the rows for my parents. Told myself maybe they were in the back. Maybe they were running late. Maybe Dad parked in the wrong lot because the man has the directional sense of a lost pigeon. I told myself a dozen little stories to explain the empty feeling in my chest. They weren't there. Hold on, let me jump in here. This is your host, not the OP, because I need you to understand the scoreboard before we go further. Mom drove 45 minutes in a thunderstorm for a talent show. She couldn't do 15 minutes for a cross-country meet. Noah's acceptance letter sat on the fridge for 2 full days before anyone acknowledged it. 2 days. Right next to the coffee maker that his dad visits every single morning. And they call that love. I don't know what dictionary they're using, but I want the return policy. Buckle up, because this next part is where the story stops being sad and starts being something else entirely. I found out later what happened while I was walking across that stage. My parents were at home throwing a party for Elise. She'd been named vice president of her sorority. Vice president of a sorority. And apparently that warranted a full backyard celebration. Streamers, a cake from the fancy bakery downtown, about 20 of her friends. I drove home after the ceremony, still in my gown because I wasn't changing in a parking garage like some kind of graduation gremlin. I pulled into the driveway and saw cars everywhere. And for one split second I thought, oh my God, they threw me a surprise party. My heart actually lifted. This rush of warmth, this fraction of a second where I believed that maybe I'd been wrong about everything. That maybe they really did care, and this was their way of making up for missing the ceremony. I walked through the front door. The house was empty. Music and laughter coming from the backyard. I walked through the kitchen. Streamers on the back porch. A banner in pink and gold. Congrats, Elise. A table full of food. Mom laughing with Elise's friends. Dad at the grill wearing that stupid apron that says Grill Sergeant, that he thinks is the funniest thing anyone has ever produced. Nobody turned around when I opened the back door. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds. Doesn't sound like a long time. But when you're standing in your graduation gown, watching your family celebrate your sister's sorority title while your degree is still warm in your hands, 10 seconds feels like an hour. I turned around, went inside, and found a note on the counter. Mom's handwriting. Noah, leftovers in the fridge. Elise had big news. Congrats on your ceremony. Love, Mom. Congrats on your ceremony. Like I'd just come back from a dentist appointment. I opened the fridge, plate of potato salad, couple pieces of cold fried chicken. I sat at the kitchen table, still in my cap and gown, and ate alone. I could hear them outside, the laughter, the music, Elise's voice doing that thing she does where she tells a story and makes it sound like the most exciting thing that's ever happened to anyone. I sat there chewing cold chicken and staring at the wall. And something inside me just clicked off. Not anger, not sadness, just nothing. Like someone found the fuse box in my chest and flipped every switch to off. I finished eating, washed my plate, went upstairs, and sat on my bed for a very long time. The next morning, I was gone. Pause. For the listeners out there, this is me jumping in, not the OP. Because I need to sit in this moment with you. His family missed his graduation to throw a party for a sorority title. Not a PhD. Not the Nobel Prize. Vice president of a sorority. And the note said, congrats on your ceremony, like he'd just renewed his driver's license. I've seen people put more effort into a birthday text than his parents put into their son's entire college graduation. If there's a hall of fame for missing the point, these two are getting inducted back-to-back in matching blazers. The morning after. Here we go. I need to back up a little before I get to that morning, because I want you to understand. Graduation day wasn't a one-off. It was the final domino in a line that had been building for years. That note on the counter wasn't just a note. It was a summary of my entire existence in that house. So the morning after, I packed a bag. Not everything, just what mattered. Clothes, my laptop, a few books, the acceptance letter I pulled off the fridge, and a photo of my grandmother. My dad's mom, who passed when I was 17. She was the only person in my family who ever made me feel like I was worth paying attention to. She used to call me her quiet storm. Said still waters run the deepest. I missed her every single day. I didn't leave a note. I know that sounds harsh, but I figured, what's the point? They left me a note about leftovers while throwing a party in the backyard. If a note was good enough for my college graduation, no note was good enough for my departure. Fair is fair. I drove to the apartment I'd already signed a lease on 3 weeks earlier. This wasn't a dramatic impulse. I'd had a job lined up at a financial services firm downtown for 2 months. Entry level. Nothing glamorous, but a start. The apartment was a tiny one-bedroom above a laundromat. Smelled like fabric softener at all hours, which honestly was kind of soothing in a weird way. I set my bag on the floor, sat on the $80 mattress I'd bought off a guy online, and just breathed. For the first time in my life, I was alone in a place that was mine, and the silence didn't hurt. It took my parents 2 full days to notice I was gone. 2 days. Their 22-year-old son packs up and leaves the day after his graduation, and it takes 48 hours for anyone to realize the room upstairs was empty. Mom texted me Tuesday evening. Not called, texted. It said, "Hey, where are you? Elise wants to borrow your charger." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We noticed you left." Elise wants to borrow your charger. I stared at that text for a long time, then typed back, "Moved out. Don't need the charger anymore. She can have it." Turned off my phone. The calls started the next day. Mom first, then Dad, then Mom again. I let them all go to voicemail. Dad's first message was casual, almost confused, like he couldn't process that I'd done something without running it by them first. "Hey bud, your mom says you moved out. Kind of sudden. Give us a call when you get a chance." No urgency, no concern, just mild inconvenience. Mom's voicemail was more emotional, but not in the way you'd hope. "Noah, this is really inconsiderate. You didn't even tell us you were leaving. Your father and I are worried." Worried. They were worried the way you're worried when you can't find the TV remote. Mildly annoyed, pretty sure it'll turn up eventually. I didn't call back. Not that day. Not that week. About a week after I moved out, Elise texted me. This one stung a little, because Elise and I weren't enemies. We weren't close either, but she wasn't cruel. She was just the beneficiary of a system she didn't build. Her text said, "Hey, Mom and Dad are being weird. Are you okay? Did something happen?" I thought about responding for a long time. Typed out a few different messages. One was honest, one was sarcastic, and one was just, "I'm fine." I went with the last one. 2 words, because I didn't have the energy to explain to my sister that the something that happened was every single day of my life in that house. She replied, "Okay, well, we miss you. Come visit soon." I almost believed her. 3 months after I moved out, Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. I came home from work and she was sitting in her car in the parking lot. My stomach dropped the second I saw her because I knew immediately. This wasn't a caring visit. This was a mission. She had that look. The one she used when she wanted something and was prepared to guilt trip her way to it. She got out and hugged me. And I'll be honest, for about 2 seconds it felt nice. Then she pulled back, and the first words out of her mouth were, "Your sister's birthday is next month and she really wants you there." Not "I'm sorry," not "I miss you," not "we should have been at your graduation." Your sister's birthday. That was the opening line. The reason she drove 40 minutes to my apartment. I felt that old familiar numbness creep back in. That fuse box clicking off again. "I'll think about it," I said. She started to say something else. Something about family being important. How Elise would be heartbroken. I just repeated, "I'll think about it, Mom." She left. I went inside, sat on my bed, and stared at the ceiling for an hour. And something in me hardened. Not in a bitter way, just in a way that said, I'm done being the one who adjusts. I'm done performing for people who aren't watching. I didn't go to Elise's birthday party. And that, as it turned out, was the first real decision I ever made for myself. Wait, hold on. Because I need to highlight this. She drove 40 minutes to his apartment, through actual effort, actual gas money, actual time. And the opening line was about Elise's birthday. Not an apology, not acknowledgement. Elise's birthday. This woman is operating on a frequency I genuinely cannot tune into. Captain Selective Memory drove across town to recruit her invisible son as an attendee for the daughter she never forgot. And here's what I love about Noah. He didn't yell, didn't slam a door, just said, "I'll think about it," twice, and let her walk back to her car. Quiet storm energy. Anyway, watch what he builds next. The months after I skipped Elise's birthday were some of the loneliest of my life. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Cutting yourself off from your family, even a family that treated you like an afterthought, doesn't feel heroic. It feels like standing in an empty room and wondering if the silence is peace or just a different kind of pain. For a while, I couldn't tell the difference. I threw myself into work. Numbers, spreadsheets, projections, those things followed rules. You put in the effort, the output was predictable. People were not predictable. People could love you and forget you in the same breath. But a balance sheet was honest. My manager at the firm was a guy named Heron, this no-nonsense former military type who communicated almost entirely in nods and grunts, but somehow made you feel like he actually saw you. Heron didn't hand out compliments like candy. So when he told me after my first quarterly review that I was sharp and had good instincts, I nearly fell out of my chair. I was building something. Bought an actual bed frame from a real furniture store. Learned to cook. Got pretty decent at pasta eventually, which felt like a bigger personal victory than it probably should have. I ran every morning at 5:30, rain or shine. Found a coffee shop near my apartment, where the barista, a woman named Sutton, remembered my order after the third visit and started asking about my day. Small things. Normal things. Things that felt enormous when you'd spent 22 years feeling like a ghost in your own home. About 3 months in, Heron walked past my desk on a Friday evening, dropped a business card on it without breaking stride, and said, "My buddy runs a financial planning practice. Pays better. Call him Monday." Then he kept walking. The name on the card was Deacon Merritt. I called Monday, interviewed Wednesday, had an offer the following week. Sometimes the people who care about you the most don't make a production out of it. They just quietly open a door and let you decide whether to walk through. Deacon was the opposite of Heron in every single way. Loud, expressive, told stories that went on for 15 minutes, and somehow landed the point right when you thought he'd completely lost the thread. Mid-50s, booming laugh, ran his practice like a family dinner. If you had a bad idea, he'd tell you straight while simultaneously making you feel smart for having it. I'd never met anyone like him. Around that same time, I met Waverly. She was a graphic designer who worked in the building next to mine. We kept ending up at the same coffee shop at the same time. I think it was a Thursday. Actually, no, wait. It was a Tuesday. Whatever, doesn't matter. Sutton, the barista, introduced us. She said we were her two most dependable customers, and we both looked like we could use a friend, which was simultaneously the most forward and most accurate thing anyone had said to me in years. Waverly was funny in a quiet way. The kind of person who'd say something devastating under her breath and then just sip her coffee like she hadn't just leveled someone. Smart, independent, and she had this way of looking at you when you were talking that made you feel like the only person in the room. If you've been following this story, you know exactly why that hit me the way it did. We started dating about 2 months after we met. I told her about my family early on. Didn't want to build something on a cracked foundation. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is harder than it sounds when someone's telling you their parents basically forgot they existed. When I finished, she was quiet for a second. Then she said, "You know you deserved better, right?" Not in a motivational poster way, just factually, like stating the weather. I don't think I'd ever heard anyone say that to me before. Not so plainly. My career was moving fast. Deacon started bringing me to client meetings as a partner, not an analyst. I was managing accounts, building relationships with clients who had real money and real trust in the firm. My income jumped significantly within that first year. I paid off the rest of my student loans in one push. Moved out of the laundromat apartment and into a proper one-bedroom with actual counter space and windows that didn't rattle when the wind blew. I ran every morning. There's something about choosing to be alone that feels completely different from being made to feel alone. One is freedom. The other is a cage. About 9 months after graduation, I got a call from Elise. Something in me said to pick up. She sounded different, quieter, less performative. She said, "Noah, I need to talk to you about something. I need you to actually hear me out." I said, "Okay." She told me things at home had changed since I left. Not dramatically, just slowly and uncomfortably. Mom and Dad argued more. Dad had gotten quieter, spent more time in the garage. Mom had developed a bad habit. Multiple pots of coffee a day, wasn't sleeping right, making passive-aggressive comments about how both her kids had abandoned her. Which was rich, considering I was the one who'd been abandoned long before I ever walked out the door. Then Elise said something I wasn't expecting. I know they treated you differently. I always knew, even when I pretended I didn't. I just didn't know how to fix it without losing what I had. That hit me in a place I didn't know was still tender. My little sister had watched me get ignored for 22 years and stayed quiet because speaking up might cost her spot in the sun. I didn't blame her. She was a kid in the same messed up system I was. But hearing her say it out loud validated 22 years of wondering if I was imagining things. If maybe I really was just too sensitive like Mom always implied. I told Elise I appreciated her calling. I wasn't angry at her. I needed more time, and I wasn't ready to come back to the family dinner table and pretend everything was fine just because the holidays were coming. She said she understood, and to her credit, she didn't push. Time kept moving. My second year at the firm, Deacon made me a junior partner. I was 24, youngest person he'd ever promoted to that position. He threw a small celebration at the office, just the team and a cake from the bakery down the street. When he stood up and called me the future of this firm, I had to stare very hard at the ceiling to keep myself together. Waverly was there. She brought me a card. Front said, "Congratulations on being important." Inside, in her handwriting, "You always were. Now everyone else is catching up." I kept that card. Still have it. I was building a life that looked nothing like the one I'd left behind. A partner who saw me. A mentor who believed in me. A career growing faster than I'd imagined. And a sense of self-worth I'd constructed brick by brick from the ground up. Because nobody handed me any of it. Nobody threw me a party or posted about my accomplishments with 3 exclamation points and a heart emoji. I built it all in the quiet, the way I'd always done everything. And I was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Not performing happiness, not convincing myself I should be happy. Just happy. Which is, of course, exactly when my father decided to call. 12 months after graduation. 12 months of silence from the man who couldn't be bothered to show up. And then my phone buzzed with a voicemail from a number I hadn't deleted, but had stopped looking for. I stared at the notification. Set the phone face down on the counter. Didn't play it. Didn't. Okay. Pause. Your host again. Because this next part is genuinely one of the most satisfying things I've covered on this channel. See, Elise called back about a month after that voicemail. And this time, she wasn't reflective. She was panicked. Dad lost his job, company restructured, whole department cut, and he'd been hiding it from everyone for 3 weeks. Here's the part that got me. She was calling Noah, the quiet kid, the one who ate cold chicken alone on his graduation day. He's the one they need now. The invisible son is suddenly the most important person in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what consequences sound like. Watch how he handles this. Around the 14-month mark after graduation, Elise called again. This time she was panicked. "Noah, Dad lost his job." I sat down. "What do you mean he lost his job?" "The company restructured. His whole department got cut. He'd been out of work for 3 weeks and hadn't told anyone. Mom found out when she saw the severance paperwork on his desk. I processed this quietly. My father, the man who spent 30 years in commercial insurance, who defined himself entirely by his stability and his ability to provide, was unemployed. And he'd hidden it for 3 weeks. That part didn't surprise me. My family's primary language was avoidance. They had the mortgage. Mom's hours had been cut at the dental office. Dad was sitting in the garage pretending to organize tools. "What do you want me to do about it, Elise?" Long pause. "I don't know. I just thought you should know." I told her I was sorry to hear it. And I meant that, whatever my father had done to me, or more accurately hadn't done, I didn't wish financial trouble on him. But I noticed something in Elise's voice. A frequency I recognized because I'd heard it in my own voice for years. She was hoping I'd fix it. The quiet one, the responsible one, the one who always figured things out without making a fuss. Step up and handle the situation the golden child and the attentive parents couldn't manage on their own. And for the first time, I felt something I'd never felt toward my family before. Not anger, not sadness. I felt the irony. The cosmic, almost comedic irony of the child they forgot suddenly being the one they needed. I went home and told Waverly. She looked at me with that steady gaze of hers and said, "What do you want to do? Not what should you do? Not what's the right thing to do. What do you actually want to do?" I loved her for asking it that way. I don't know yet, but I'm not rushing into anything. Over the next few weeks, I thought about my family deliberately, talked it through with Waverly, talked it through with Deacon, who, despite being a financial advisor, had surprisingly solid emotional intelligence for a guy whose primary way of expressing feelings was a firm handshake. He said something that stuck. Noah, you don't owe anyone access to your peace, not even your parents, especially not the ones who never gave you any. That was the thing I'd been trying to articulate for over a year. Here's what I decided. I would reach out. I would offer to help. Not because they deserved it, but because I had the means. And I'd rather be the kind of person who helps than the kind who doesn't. But I'd do it on my terms, with boundaries so clear you could see them from space. I called Elise first. I'm going to come home, I said, but I need you to understand something. I'm not coming back to be the quiet kid who eats cold chicken and pretends it's fine. I'm coming back as an adult with things to say, and they're going to hear them. Quiet for a second. Okay, that's fair. And Elise, I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this for me. I know, she said. I believed her. I spent the next week preparing, not writing out a speech, just internally. I thought about every moment that had cut me, every silence that spoke louder than words. And I thought about who I was now, the junior partner, the guy with the woman who loved him, and the mentor who called him the future, the guy who built himself from scratch in a one-bedroom that smelled like fabric softener. I wasn't the invisible kid anymore. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday morning, brought Waverly with me, not as a shield, but as a witness. I wanted someone there who knew the real me, the me I'd become, not the me my parents had decided I was. I pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same, but tired. Hedges a little overgrown. Paint peeling on the shutters. Dad's truck in the driveway with a layer of dust on it that told me it hadn't moved in a while. Everything about the place looked like it had quietly given up on pretending. Waverly put her hand on mine. Whatever happens in there, we're going home together after. I knocked. Mom opened the door and just stared at me for a moment, like she was looking at a stranger. In a way, she was. She was thinner than I remembered, lines deeper around her eyes, wearing an old cardigan I recognized from when I was in middle school. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. Noah. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. Hey, Mom. She hugged me. I let her. I hugged her back the way you hug someone at a funeral. Present, but measured. I introduced Waverly, and Mom did that thing where she tried to be welcoming, while clearly off balance by the fact that her estranged son had shown up with a woman she'd never met. The house smelled the same. Coffee and that lavender spray Mom used on the curtains. But it felt different. Quieter. Smaller. Dad was in the living room. He stood up when I walked in, and the first thing I noticed was that he'd aged badly. Not gradually, but the way people age when something inside them breaks. Lost weight, hair grayer, eyes hollowed out in a way I recognized from my own worst days. Son, that was all he said. Dad. We didn't hug. We just stood there. Two men separated by about 8 feet and 22 years of things that should have been said but weren't. Elise arrived 10 minutes later, hugged me tight, whispered, "Thank you for coming," then immediately looked at Waverly and said, "Oh, thank God. You look like a normal person. I was worried he'd show up with someone who also reads financial reports for fun." Waverly laughed. I almost did too. We sat in the living room. For a few minutes, nobody said anything that mattered. Mom offered coffee. Dad talked about the weather, the most painfully familiar scene of my life. Everyone performing normal, while an elephant the size of a freight train sat in the corner of the room. So I addressed it. I didn't come here for small talk. My voice was calm, steady. I came because Elise told me about Dad's job, and I want to help. But before we talk about any of that, there are some things I need to say. And I need you to actually hear them. Not nod and change the subject, not tell me I'm being too sensitive. Hear them. Mom opened her mouth. I held up a hand. Please, just let me talk. I took a breath. Graduation day, May 17th. I walked across the stage and collected a degree I worked 4 years for, held down a job, paid my own way. Neither of you were there. You were in the backyard throwing a party for Elise because she got named vice president of her sorority. When I came home, still in my cap and gown, there was a note on the counter that said leftovers in the fridge. I ate cold chicken alone at the kitchen table, while I could hear you all laughing outside. Mom's face crumbled. Dad stared at the floor. That wasn't the first time. That was the last time. The last in a line that goes back as far as I can remember. The car she got that I didn't. The dinners for her achievements, while mine got a, "That's nice, honey." The acceptance letter I put on the fridge myself that sat there for 2 days before anyone noticed. I'm not saying you're bad people. I'm not saying you didn't love me. I'm saying you didn't see me. And there's a difference between not loving someone and not seeing them. But the damage feels pretty much the same when you're the one who's invisible. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock on the mantel ticking. Elise was crying quietly. I didn't look at her because I knew if I did, I'd lose my composure. Dad spoke first, voice rough. "Noah, I didn't realize it was that bad." "I know you didn't. That's the problem. It shouldn't have taken me leaving for you to notice I was there." Mom was crying now, fully. "I'm so sorry," she said, not making excuses, not explaining it away. Just that, over and over. I let her. I didn't rush to comfort her. I'd spent my whole life managing other people's emotions at the expense of my own, and I was done. Then I said, "Here's what I'm willing to do. I've done well for myself. I have the means to help with the mortgage while Dad finds a new position. I can connect him with people in my network who have leads. But I'm not doing it as the grateful son who's just happy to be invited back in. I'm doing it as an adult who's choosing to help. And you need to understand, this doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't fix us overnight. It's just me being the kind of person I want to be." Dad looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't distraction or indifference. It was respect. Not the performative kind you give strangers. The real kind. The kind you give someone who just showed you exactly who they are and didn't flinch. "You grew up," he said quietly. "I had to. Nobody was going to do it for me." That landed the way I intended. Not as a weapon, just as a fact. A simple, irrefutable fact. We talked for another hour. Some of it practical. Details about the mortgage, job leads for Dad. Some of it was hard. Mom trying to explain without excusing. Elise admitting she'd known and stayed quiet. Dad struggling to articulate feelings he'd apparently never been taught to have. It wasn't a movie scene. Nobody delivered a speech that fixed everything overnight. It was messy and uncomfortable and incomplete, which is exactly what real things look like. Before I left, Dad walked me to the car, stood there with his hands in his pockets and said, "That voicemail I left you, you ever listen to it?" "No," he nodded. "It wasn't a good message. I didn't say the right things. I never know how to say the right things with you. That's my fault." That was the closest my father had ever come to a real apology. "Maybe someday you try again," I said, "in person." He looked at me with wet eyes and nodded. Waverly and I drove home in silence. She held my hand the whole way. When we parked, she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a second. "Light," I said. "I feel light." "Okay, hold on." Because that confrontation was surgical. No yelling, no breaking down, no begging for an apology. He walked in, said exactly what needed to be said, offered exactly what he was willing to give, and left on his own terms with his woman. That is what accountability without self-destruction looks like. Most guys either blow up the whole room or swallow everything and say nothing. Noah did neither. He walked in as someone who'd already won and made sure they knew it. I had to. Nobody was going to do it for me. Write that somewhere, you'll see it. The update is good too. Final update. That was about a year ago. Dad found a new job through a contact Deacon connected him with. Smaller firm, steady work. Not glamorous, but honest, which I think he needed more than the title anyway. Mom and I talk on the phone every couple of weeks. Still a little stiff, like two people learning a language they should have been speaking for years. But it's real. Elise and I talk regularly now. Real conversations, not surface-level check-ins. She asked me for career advice last month. First time she'd ever done that. I gave her honest feedback, and she actually took it. That felt like something. My parents and I aren't fixed. We're not a sitcom family that hugged it out over pie and forgot 22 years happened. We're a work in progress. But the difference is, I no longer show up performing for their approval. I show up when I choose to, on terms I set, and I leave when I need to. Deacon officially retired last month. He handed me the keys to the practice. We both got a little emotional about it, and I'm not even a little ashamed to admit that. I'm 27 years old, and I run my own wealth management firm. Let me say that again because I still can't quite believe it. Waverly and I moved in together. She hung a framed print in the hallway that says, "Still waters run deep." Every time I walk past it, I think of my grandmother. I still haven't played that voicemail. Probably never will. It belongs to a version of me, and a version of my father, that doesn't exist anymore. Whatever he said in those 1 minute and 43 seconds, he said it to a boy who was invisible. I'm not that boy, and the next time my dad has something to say to me, I want him to say it to the man I became, face to face, out loud, where I can see his eyes and know he means it. If you take one thing from this, it's not that your family has to come around. It's not that patience always pays off. It's simpler than that. You stop waiting for the people who forgot to look for you, and you build something they can't ignore. Not for them. For you. For the quiet storm version of yourself that was always worth paying attention to. So, if you've been the invisible one in your own family, the one who ate the cold chicken and washed the plate and went to bed without saying a word, what would you have done differently? And where are you now? Drop it in the comments. I want to know. Look, Noah isn't a superhero. He's a guy who ate cold chicken alone on his graduation day and decided that was the last time. He didn't blow up his family, didn't go scorched earth. He just quietly built something they couldn't ignore, and then, when the moment came, walked in and said his piece without flinching. That's not a revenge story. That's a blueprint. Drop your thoughts below. Would you have played that voicemail? Let us know. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button because the next story drops soon, and honestly, you don't want to miss it.